It's the Redbird Reboot podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans?
He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Redbird Reboot.
Hello there, Arizona Cardinals fans. Welcome into the Redbird Reboot podcast. We are here on a Thursday night recording, and we've got a special guest with us, the podfather himself. Joe Comeau is here to talk about the Arizona Cardinals coaching search and updates. Marcos, Joe, I'm doing pretty well. It's been cold, but not super cold. I know there's a huge storm that seems to be coming in for some of you guys around the United States that's going to be there, so make sure that you guys are all safe. Let's start with Joe. How are you doing as we go to talk about a Cardinals coaching search that has been moving slow as molasses and yet seems like we might be able to take a couple of steps forward and figure out where this franchise is going with their next head coach? How are you doing, sir?
I'm well, and I'm here in Georgia, so we actually got snow last Sunday. We're probably going to get rain and ice this time, so we're getting the cold that you all aren't getting. But I'm doing well. Semester's up and running. I obviously work at the university here, and I would add another descriptive word to what you said about the Cardinal search. You said slow as molasses. I would say slow as usual. Because that's kind of how they have operated, because for many reasons that we can talk about. But yeah, it's been slow going, and I think we've just kind of gotten used to that, it seems like, right?
No, I think it's definitely a place where the Cardinals have been one of the last teams to hire. The exception, of course, being that 2019 year where Cliff Kingsbury was hired very quickly. It seemed like they knew exactly who they wanted, how they're going to bring him in, and he wanted to come here and coach Kyler Murray. Let's go with Marcos at least here. How are you doing as we're getting ready to launch into some of this news that we've seen? There's been a lot more news than you'd expect surrounding the Cardinals in the last couple of weeks, which doesn't all have to do with the coaching search. We'll get into that in a second, but first of all, sir, what's new in your world?
I'm feeling a lot better than what I would say like a week ago, especially after the Buffalo Bills lost to the Broncos. So hearing about the news about the new coaching interest that we had no idea they even got an interview, that was like a breath of fresh air. I'm not saying that this guy is going to be certified like beast, but I like what I see from this guy so far.
I absolutely think that it's going to be interesting. We've got a couple of people in our comments section on YouTube. We've got David saying Joe Comeau for head coach. I honestly think you've got the Bruce Arians beard already set there, or maybe the Sean McDermott beard.
That's the only thing I got going for me as a coach.
You got there, at least for the most part. And Mizaki Felix is saying, hey, what's up, Professor? Missed you last time. Good to be here, of course, with the Cardinal Rule himself. So let's go and talk a little bit now with the coaching search. Now, we've talked about some of the head coaching options for the Arizona Cardinals last week. We'll do a quick flyover and mostly focus on some of the new names that we didn't get to talk about last time, as well as a little bit of the updates that we've been able to see in the coaching search. But before we get into the details of that coaching search, and I'll get that pulled up over here on the screen for you guys, we're going to be talking a little bit about some other news that popped up, which would involve one Drew Petzing. So we've got Drew Petzing as the brand new coordinator for your Detroit Lions. This is something that came out as a little bit of a shock. I know some Cardinals fans were on Twitter wars with people about Drew Petzing was terrible. I know some Lions fans were incredibly optimistic about him. I know some of it was the other way around. Or some Cardinals fans are like wishing him all the best, wishing him good luck. Some Lions fans were feeling despondent and hopeless. Let's go and kind of sort out all of this, because I think a lot of us expected that Drew Petzing would probably be on the staff of a Kevin Stefanski or would follow Jonathan Gannon around. Being on the staff of the Lions, who just lost Ben Johnson to the Chicago Bears gig a year ago. You saw names floated around such as Mike McDaniel even for the role, and it goes to Drew Petzing. This feels like it's a scheme fit, but it was definitely a little bit underwhelming. Joe, what are some of the thoughts that you had when you first heard that Drew Petzing was moving to from the sunny desert to the cold, frigid north of Detroit?
Well, I thought it was a really great landing spot for him. I mean, for as much as Cardinals fans have been down on him, right? He's been, as I was saying before we went live, persona non grata. He's just been the he fans, and I was talking about this on another podcast I was on tonight. Fans were out on him before they were out on anyone else, other than the people who had been out on Kyler Murray for a long time, right? He was the guy that fans were down on because of some of the play calling, because they feel like he didn't do a good enough job using and or helping develop Marvin Harrison Jr. And so, to be a guy who, from our perspective, is very much, kind of on the outs to landing an offensive coordinator gig with a very good team, right? That maybe had a little bit of a down year. It's a really good team. Is great for him. Um, I do think it's an intriguing fit. The thing about him is his run scheme is kind of the strength of passing concepts where the questions have been and then the play calling, right? Especially in high stress situations. And they have Jameer Gibbs. They have some really good offensive linemen. They certainly, as I think you're going to probably mention they need to maybe replace a few of those guys, but they can do that. They've got still some good core, and they've got a veteran quarterback who for their situation might be able to kind of compensate for where some of Petzing's downfalls are. So I think he, as much as fans don't want to acknowledge this, he has a chance to be successful there. It's certainly a good fit in terms of what he does as far as the run game.
Right. One of the best comparisons I think that we were able to make after seeing a couple of times I heard from someone was Greg Roman. When you think of Greg Roman, you think of a dynamic, diverse run game, but the passing game was something that going into this previous year, we said Cardinals were sixth in rushing. The pass game was still in the 20s. So you wanted to see them take a step forward in the pass game and receiving game. We didn't really see that. Marcos, do you think that that was one of these cases where what we saw from Drew Petzing was that limitations of the Cardinals and what they had talent-wise, how much of it was just limited schematically? What do you think as far as about Drew Petzing and some of the scheme as far as why we didn't see it achieve the expectations we'd hoped for with Arizona this year?
Oh boy, some people are gonna get mad at me for this one, but I've always been on record to be able to say that like Drew Petzing has been mostly thrown under the bus with like circumstances that people just can't like verify for instance, when you're talking about like receivers aren't like getting open because the scheme is not getting open, if you're watching the broadcast view, you can't see what's going on downfield, what kind of coverages they're going against. So a lot of these concepts that I'm seeing is a lot of the concepts that I see from the Shanahan tree, from obviously um I forgot Stefanski is obviously the one that's directly correlated to what Drew Petzing's doing when it comes to his scheme, but they all come from that same type of coaching tree. And the one main staple about any type of situation with somebody like that as your offensive coordinator is the intermediate middle of the field is essential to be able to constantly, keep the chains moving, have that actual attack of like getting these linebackers to suck in so that way they can go ahead and layer the ball over the middle when it comes to these down the field shotgun off. I mean, not shotgun, under center concepts and whatnot. So to me, when I heard this as a hire, to me, I thought this myself. I said, "Wow, that is like actually the landing spot I would have thought that he would go to, other than like somewhere as like a an assistant or maybe like a specialist under somebody from the Shanahan or maybe even follow Stefanski over to Atlanta." But when I thought to myself, "Wow, these guys are going like they're really trusting him when it comes to like having him be the offensive play caller." Obviously, he has the as little as he has when it comes to the experience to be able to be a play caller. You see, he has the experience. So they just think to themselves, like, hey, we need somebody to have the same similar type of a fashion that we were looking for. We want to have more of like a run dominant like offense. He's called about every single concept that you can think about when it comes to coming from that coaching tree. His issue has remained that the sequencing is the one thing that's killed him. The sequencing, I will say, has been horrible with Drew Petzing. He doesn't set up plays the way he should. If he gets that knowledge and experience to be able to do so, I believe he's going to have success over there, but you never know.
Yeah, I think that when you look at also how the run game stumbled this year, a lot of people looked at Clayton Adams, and I think the biggest difference when you're talking about the sequencing is also the calls themselves. One of the conversations I think that we had, which was how good Clayton Adams was for the Cardinals, he carried a lot of those pieces over with him to Dallas with their run game. Javonte Williams averaged about 5 yards per carry, which looked very similar to a James Conner season for Arizona that we were able to see underneath what we saw with Clayton Adams. We were able to at least see that there's a lot of, I think, and this is maybe with not just the play calling or the sequencing. One of the biggest takeaways I had was when you're talking about counter plays or another term, pin and pull, where you're able to take a guy who's like a center and you kind of move him and he ends up all of a sudden blocking the guy who's there on the edge, and then you're running an outside zone play. That ends up being one of the places where, hey, guess what? That guy who's on the outside, who's blitzing as a linebacker or a safety coming down into the box, suddenly you get a 300-pound guy moving upfield, blocking him, freeing up your running back to just kind of follow some of those plays. What we saw from this, at least this year, Marcos, that I felt like was there's a lot of times there were good play calls that were there, but there's other times where he would call the same pin and pull plays, and defenses eventually caught on to it and were able to sniff it out. And so he would call some of those plays, like a good example, it's first down, Jacoby drops back, you got a deep pass play that's been set up, he gets sacked, or steps up for maybe a 2-yard loss. 2nd and 12, they run a counter play. Next sequence, they're going up, they have a similar setup, 2nd and 10, they run a counter play, just running the ball there, same play call that was there. What I think, at least what we said, was counter in 2023 and 2024 was their bread and butter. And I don't know if you guys have ever been there. I was talking about this with Joe before the podcast. We talked about how Texas Roadhouse has some phenomenal bread and butter. If you've ever been to Texas Roadhouse, it's to die for. But it does not make a meal to take bread and butter and make it the entire meal. And I think with this year, a lot of what we saw with Drew Petzing was he took those pin and pull plays, and instead of just having that be the bread on top of what's a great meal, he kind of tried to make those plays the meal. And I think that's a big reason why it did not work. Whereas a much more kind of diverse run game, being able to favor running the ball up the middle a lot more, and then using those counter plays to be able to mix it up and fool defenses. That was what we got to see this year, that the Cowboys were able to run with Adams. We did not see the same thing with Drew Petzing. And I think in Detroit, he's going to have a better offensive line. There's going to be, like you said, Joe, a veteran quarterback in Jared Goff. But I think goes without saying, Joe, that there is going to be some adjustment that Drew Petzing is going to be needing to do. I don't think it's just simply a talent thing. We need to see him take a step forward as a play caller if he's going to have success in Detroit that he didn't have in Arizona.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think where a lot of that's going to come in is the meeting rooms with him, Campbell, Jared Goff, and some of the other coaches that have been there, right? Because when you have a veteran quarterback like Goff, who's in charge of that offense and has been in charge of offense before, knows what he's doing, there's a lot more collaboration. And, one of the critiques of Kyler, some people say the whole study thing, I don't want to get into that so much, but he was much more of a system spread kind of offense background, like kind of the air raid was his background, and less steeped in this kind of, Shanahan type of West Coast offense. So he doesn't bring as much of the background experience to be a collaborator in developing that. And I think Goff is going to be able to be much more of a coach in the room with him and help bridge that and make that transition a lot easier and better, because he's been in these kinds of systems going back, to his time, with McVay.
I just want to add one note. They didn't run as much pin and pull this year. They ran more of a outside wide zone, and it was mostly away from like the right side of the offensive line. Because I don't even have to explain to you why that was the case, especially during the beginning of the season. So what they were trying to do is they were running their bread and butter, which is counter. That's one of the obvious concepts that he loves to run a lot. It was a lot of man blocking, a lot of inside zone with wide zone exchanges. So basically just trying to get a lane open, and because they didn't have the type of running back that could read outside in or inside out. I mean, you got to think about it. Like, they didn't find success till later on in the season with the mixed results. With every single game, there was like a running back having a good game, and then the other one wouldn't be able to come through. You had Michael Carter having a good game, and then you had DeMarcado having a bad game, and then it's vice versa. and of course we have Bam Knight having a couple of good games. So it was just, I believe that losing James Conner really actually sunk him when it came to his playbook. So it was mostly like, hey, we got to try what we got to try because we're having in and out with the offensive linemen. You know, some of these guys have strengths, some of them have weaknesses. Calvin Beachum is a great guy, but he cannot run block to save his life. So, yeah, it was just too much variation. So we'll see
Yeah.
what happens.
I would agree with you in that I don't know if we trust the vision yet that we got to see. We only got to see it for like one game essentially with Trey Benson before he got hurt. But with what James Conner was able to do, I think it does show that running backs do matter in the NFL. You can't just plug any guy back there. We did get to see at least how when they had a couple of games with Bam Knight because they liked a bigger back with size who was able to run between the tackles, had a little bit of burst in him that Michael Carter didn't have. And when Amari DiMercato was also hurt, we saw that he had some of the burst and he had some of the size, but it really came down to ultimately, like you said, Marcos, that the James Conner injury made a big oosh. I know that a lot of times watching those counter plays, I'd be watching to see Froholt would be running off to the right-hand side, and you knew that they would line up with people like Trey McBride, and it'd be Paris Johnson, their best run blocker, would pull to the left. He ended up missing a couple of games as well this year due to injury, although by that point, it was kind of like guys were getting shut down for the season. So I don't think it's like too much to look at the last couple of games. But like you said, everything kind of came together in a way that really made it difficult for the Cardinals to find any sort of ground footing. And it's something where that's going to be interesting with Detroit because what are they going to do at center? Is Taylor Decker going to stay retired? Dan Skipper, the backup offensive lineman who's been their kind of Kelvin Beachum swing tackle, he retired and is taking on a coaching position. I think the other thing with Petzing, and we can talk about some of the past concepts, is we always would see that Drew, really his past concepts would favor tight ends and the X receiver. Like if you were the X receiver, he'd get the ball to you. If you were the Z receiver, opposite the receiver, you'd be running routes to open up lanes for the tight end, for the X receiver underneath. And then he'd also have something available for swing passes. They would throw the ball to running backs a ton as well. I think one of the questions, at least for me, is can we see Drew Petzing if we don't have the tight end Sam Laporta healthy to start the season? Them getting him back, I think, is huge for the fit in this offense because we see just how much Drew loves 12 personnel, 13 personnel, getting multiple tight ends in the run game. Can we see a passing game thrive with both Jamison Williams and with Amon-Ra St. Brown? Because in Arizona, we only saw it be the Marvin Harrison Jr. had a couple games, gets hurt, and then all of a sudden it's the Michael Wilson show. That's something that I think we'll have to see with his passing game concepts. Is it going to be able to feed everyone? Because that's something that we were not able to see quite in Arizona.
Well, like this is the one thing that shocked me because I think this is what's gonna have to happen if Sam Laporta isn't out there. Amon St. Brown is apparently a really good blocking wide receiver. I can never tell by looking at him. So in a way, he kind of gets used in like that pseudo like wide receiver role. And honestly, don't quote me on this because I could be incredibly wrong about this, but I swear I heard some or I watched a video or something came across as like, hey, Amon St. Brown is that like slot big like blocking wide receiver. I don't think he's even that big, but I would imagine that the role would be that way. But I mean, I believe that Detroit will at least have their designated like blocking tight end to be able to fill that role. But if you look at like the Shanahan and like the McVay side of it, McVay likes to like favor his wide receivers while Shanahan and that side and Stefanski, they like to have like their premier X receiver and then their tight end to be like the big catch getters, and of course they'll have like a blocking tight end be the fullback, like the I forgot what the guy from the fullback from the 49ers. Everybody knows who I'm talking about, except that I always forget. Juszczyk, there you go. So they'll have
fullback.
the guy be the designated fullback that'll get catches here and there. So I would say that that's a balanced offense in that perspective, but I would like to see these wide receivers, especially since we do have Marvin Harrison Jr. and Michael Wilson, be like more targeted in this new type of offense.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see how this fit in this marriage will go, because I think he'll be running a lot of Dan Campbell's playbook as well versus maybe the Drew Petzing playbook. That alone could lead to a little bit more success for the Lions. And as we saw, the Dan Campbell, he was willing to move on from his coach ultimately at the end of the year with John Moten. Jonathan Gannon, from what we at least know or have heard, seems like that either the decision that may have played a part, whether or not to move on from Drew Petzing. I know that times we had said other podcasts have been more against Drew Petzing, move on midseason. I had never felt that was the case, but it's going to be really interesting to watch, because if he does thrive with Detroit, it's going to be kind of a black mark on the job that happened in Arizona this year, as far as with injuries and everything that came to fruition for him.
Yeah, I just add one more note too. You talked about how the passing game and or the receivers and everything. I mean, we know that Petzing really liked 13 personnel, right, and the run game. And I could actually see even in the passing game with the receivers that they have is they'll need some tight end help probably. Laporta's really good, but like in terms of the receivers, I could actually see the receivers they have being a really good fit for what he wants to do, in that you've got the one stud, right? Your Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then you've got your deep threat and Jameson, who doesn't have to be a high volume guy. He just takes the top off the defense. And then, your third receiver is Tesla or whoever else you get in there, but you don't rely on those guys. So, I've always compared what the Cardinals were trying to do, at least not in terms of system, but in terms of distribution, to what the Ravens do. Heavy tight end, heavy running, and maybe you can feed one more receiver. And I think that works with the Lions.
Yeah, I think it works with the Lions too, where I think it had a hard time working too, is you didn't take a Joe Alton at number 4 overall. You took a Marvin Harrison Jr. at number 4 overall as a receiver. And as we got to see this year, the offense looked at its best when it had Michael Wilson playing, and the wide receiver too was just Xavier Weaver running those deep routes, occasionally getting a long bomb, like that 4th down play from Jacoby Brissett that the Cardinals tried to win the game on. It's interesting to see exactly how it will take, because some guys will see their stock rise and fall just throughout the NFL. Petzing's is one. As they said in Star Wars Episode 1, we'll watch his career with great interest. I think is something we'll have to see how it goes, especially with a new coaching staff coming in. And with that, so let's talk a little bit now. We reviewed a little bit from last week what we're looking for. Now, we said we talked about we're looking for a leader of men. Get a smart offensive or defensive mind that's on the staff to be able to pair with that. We want someone to keep up with the rest of the West. We also wanted to see, can there be enough experience at the NFL level, maybe even former head coach experience? Get someone who's done it before. Wanted to have someone who came from a history of winning or a franchise that was winning. Wanted to make sure that the abilities for the fundamentals on the defensive level, or being able to be innovative. So essentially you're able to get really good at stopping the run or have a unique style defense. And then last, we're looking for, is there any connection to Monty Ossenfort that we are seeing? Someone who we either worked with before, someone we knew. We didn't see that necessarily with Jonathan Gannon and his hire. One of the things that we talked about last week, and we'll have a little bit more of this in the update, but some of the interviews the Cardinals have had previously known to us have been Clint Kubiak. We talked a little bit about Thomas Brown, the passing game coordinator for the Patriots again. Matt Nagy, someone who is on the list, who essentially has been passed up for the Titans role. I talked about Raheem Morris, someone who potentially could be, maybe if not a head coach candidate, a DC candidate for the Arizona Cardinals. We had Anthony Weaver was in for an interview. And we've got some new names that we're going to be talking about here, as well as a couple of new hires. Before we get to that, we're going to call this as halftime for our show at the Redbird Reboot podcast. We got a couple of comments we want to get to. Yeah, Keith Davis saying he's been a fan since they moved here. Heartbreaking to hear the team is the least attractive to candidates. I think honestly that our job and the Raiders' job is something we'll talk in just a second about with the Raiders and how they've been used as well. It's not been nearly as lovable of a job as it may have been in the past. We got Brian saying Papa Joe.
A lot of
Yeah.
fans out there, huh?
Got a lot of people over there. We got Miyazaki Felix talking about Petsing being close with Ben Johnson. They were in each other's weddings. I believe they were even roommates at the same college dorm. It's something crazy to think about, at least for everything. Brian is saying about Drew Petsing that Lex Luthor is on the Lions now. Probably not the biggest fan, at least with the bald reference to the supervillain Lex Luthor. David Pan saying that Drew's going to need to grow his hair out to stay warm in Detroit. It's going to be there. Exactly. Accelerator said the Cards are going 17-0, so he is very confident with Drew Petzing moving on from the Arizona Cardinals. At least. And then David Pan also is saying that Drew Petzing has no beef with the defenses, only bread and butter. Beef being as far as arguing with defense. I think that's great. And then Mr. Tony Geeter saying that losing offensive line coach to the Cowboys lost our offensive run game. I think that is a great question to be able to ask. And then we'll be able to finish it off with Jeff asking, are we going to get a head coach, my buddy? The answer to that, of course, is yes. But it's not going to be one of these guys as we transition. So we'll first start with a firing before we talk about the new hires. Sean McDermott is out as the Buffalo Bills head coach. I think there can be no coaching list complete without bringing him up because he had a high level of success, a winning record in Buffalo. Was let go because the Bills lost to the Denver Broncos, and Broncos lost their starting quarterback as well. This was a little bit of a shock firing because the Bills won their first playoff game, get to the next playoff game, lose that game in dramatic fashion in overtime. They move on. There seems to be a lot of weird, confusing comments coming out of Buffalo, but being able to put Sean McDermott in, and we'll talk about him a little bit as we get into some of the other candidates. He right now for me is in the honorable mention category with one big reason why, and it's that we have not heard of the Cardinals scheduling or bringing him in for an interview. And until that is the case, I think you kind of leave him in the same category of like a Mike Tomlin or someone on there who you'd say, hey, it's great to think about, but let's get him in for an interview. Know that they contacted him first. Some reports have said that he's already ruled out a team like the Raiders and the Cardinals or teams that don't have a quarterback, a bit of a rebuild. Joe, this would be, if I had to be perfectly honest, especially with the guys who've been hired, you probably have a new name jump to the top of my list for once for coaches, but he's not on the list yet for interview candidates, which makes you wonder, is he a guy the Cardinals can even get?
Yeah, Sean McDermott would be great for the Cardinals. He'd be a stabilizing force. And being realistic here, like this team is, we've talked about this division is so tough. You could do everything right and still finish third place in this division with this Cardinals team for the next couple of years. I don't know that he's going to have interest. But if they somehow could get him in here, he could help raise the floor, stabilize, bring some professionalism. Is he going to get them winning the division? I wouldn't bet on that, but I don't know that there's, unless we catch lightning in the bottle with some really brilliant up and coming kind of coordinator, I'm not betting on that. I have a feeling it's just not going to happen. I think he's a guy who's going to wait it out for a more stable job and see if he lands something with greater stability. One of the things that has been said, I forget who it was that tweeted this out. I wish I could remember to give them credit for it. But head coaches don't usually get third chances. And now he's had some success. He, obviously was very successful with Buffalo. So he might be one of those guys who could get a third chance. But if you are a second chance coach, Cardinals are very, much not a team you want to look at, because if you put yourself in a situation where you're not going to be, where everything's against you being successful, you may not get that third chance, right? That's why someone like Mike McDaniel was just not going to happen, right? Those kinds of guys.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with you. Like, if he's looking at this situation and it fails, and it's like a Pete Carroll situation where none of us thought that it was going to be that bad of a season for the Raiders, and it ended up becoming the way it is, I don't think anybody's going to have Pete Carroll as their top of the list as a head coaching hire. So, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, with Sean McDermott, you take a look at his record. He's 148 wins, 98 losses. I should say at least 148 games, 98 wins, 50 losses. He's won 2 games to 1 loss, so it basically wins 2 out of every 3 games, which is crazy good. It's one of the crazy things is that they fired him in the first place. They felt like that they had talent and that he wasn't coaching to the level of talent that the Buffalo Bills had with Josh Allen. I think he probably felt that when you look at some of the receiver cores and look at some of how the defense was with some injuries this year, they may have not had the talent necessarily to be able to win is probably part of how he felt. He has had only one single losing season, which would be the first year, Josh Allen's rookie year. They went 6-10. But the previous year, they went 9-7 with Tyrod Taylor as the starting quarterback and made the playoffs. It'd be, I think, honestly, a very similar situation to what Arizona is at right now. If he was to take the job, it'd be similar to he'd have to join a team that has talent on it, but not a quarterback solution. He was able to coach that team to a 9-7 record. And then when he did get another quarterback, you had consistent 10, 11, 13 win seasons. This last year, he finished 12-5. But in the playoffs, they struggled. They were never able to really get past the first or second round of the playoffs and lost the AFC Championship game to the Kansas City Chiefs back in 2024. They were just not able to get a Super Bowl appearance, and that's ultimately the reason why he's gone. I think that, honestly, if you're taking a look at it, because of the record, like you said, sure, this could be a spot where you say, hey, Sean, here's what we got going for you. Talent on defense, talent on offense. Just like Josh Allen, you get to pick your quarterback. We're going to make sure that we wait and get the right quarterback, just like Buffalo waited to get the right quarterback. They actually, in 2017, traded back from Patrick Mahomes because they were so enthused about Josh Allen coming into the league a year from then. It's one of the spots of where I think that, like you're saying, Joe, it's a place where the question is not, is the Cardinals a good fit for Sean McDermott? Is Sean McDermott too good for the Arizona Cardinals? There's only 5 head coaching spots left, and it begs to be seen, could he end up being just a shoo-in for a job like the Steelers gig? Could he be a shoo-in for a spot that is looking for a head coach that maybe is a better fit than the Cardinals? It seems like the answer could be yes, and maybe he would just stay out a year of coaching, but I'm very curious to see now that he's been fired much later than the other coaches. Is it just teams are getting a little bit of a late jump on getting him into the building, or is he just simply going to say, I'm going to sit out a year? We will see. That's something that remains to be seen, but until the Cardinals are able to get him in for an interview, he's going to be in kind of this honorable mention category. And that's going to be a spot where it also is going to be in a potentially similar place to the next coach that we're going to talk about who got hired, which is John Harbaugh, signing a deal to go to the New York Giants. Going to be at least a 5-year deal. He's going to be making massive changes to that place. I don't think he was ever an option for us, Joe. Much like the next option in, I think, Robert Saleh as well. We had heard that he was going to be scheduled to get on a plane to Arizona. We knew that Harbaugh wasn't an option, but could Saleh have been an option? I think after everything went and took place, Robert Saleh never got on that plane to Arizona. Seems like he may have been saying, hey, guys, let's get this deal done. You've got Cam Ward. You got some exciting pieces on defense. It's a little bit of a rebuild. You know, there's questions about your ownership, but hey, you got a quarterback. You got some defensive players. This is the place I'd like to be. Don't make me get on that plane to Arizona. It feels in a lot of ways, Joe, like the Cardinals may have been used as leverage. And let me tell you, back with days of Andy Reid and other coaches, it feels a lot like that's how you've been as an Arizona Cardinals fan, unfortunately, where you're kind of a stop for coaches who use you as leverage on the way to the place they'd rather be, which is a frustrating place to be as a franchise and a fan of it.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, I wanted Saleh, but I was clear-eyed about the fact that this was a leverage move, like the way that it was put out in social media, that he had a an interview scheduled with the Cardinals. His agent got that out there so that he could put pressure on the Titans. So you knew it was happening. There was still the outside chance the Titans passed on him, and then we had a chance. But we knew that was happening. We're used to it, and as we talked about, like this isn't, for multiple reasons, this Cardinals gig is not a desirable one. Thanks, Michael Bidwell, right? And other things as well. So we just have to deal with it. We just have to let that stuff flows downhill, and we're at the bottom of the hill right now. And we can whine about it, or we can just say, yep, this is our lot in life right now. So I'm not surprised by it. We just have to deal with that. But as we talked about before we went on, there's some good coaches out there. And I kind of made this point before we went live. there are more than 5 names I like, and there are 5 coaching jobs left. What we're competing against, to me, the biggest thing is the coordinators deciding they'd rather stay a coordinator than take our job. That's our biggest competition right now, is people pulling the Ben Johnson from a couple years ago when he was with the Lions and decided to pass and wait. And it worked out really well for him, right? So are some of the names we're going to talk about we're competing with their current job with guys some of the guys we really like.
Yep, we'll talk about one of those coordinators at least, then a second who is not going to be getting at least one head coaching job, but we'll talk about another head coach that is going to be getting a job. Cardinals had wanted an interview with him as well, and that would be Jeff Hafley, the defensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. Here he is as a Boston football head coach. He's another guy that the Cardinals wanted a second interview. It seemed like he was going to be one of their finalists along with Robert Saleh. He ends up not coming back for a second interview, ends up going to the Miami Dolphins. I think this was a done deal. I don't think the Cardinals were going to get him because the Dolphins hired a Green Bay Packers personnel guy. Seemed very likely that he had that connection with Hafley. He ends up getting one of the 5 closed head coaching jobs. And I think with watching the Packers defense this year, I saw a huge difference in their ability to get to the passer from the team with Micah Parsons to the team without Micah Parsons. And I think that one, yes, that's a talent issue, but he reminded me a lot of kind of the Jonathan Gannon hire of this era of being like a leader of men, winning the interview process pretty handily with people, being very impressive. I think that he's going to probably not call plays and be more of that CEO style coach in Miami as well. And he's also, like Jonathan Gannon, taking on quite a rebuild. They've got to figure out stuff with Tua Tagovailoa. He's going to be on the contract books for quite a bit of time as well. It's going to be really interesting to be able to see how the Miami job will go. Another guy announced earlier today, Jesse Minter, moving from Jim Harbaugh's DC to the head coach of the Ravens, similar from the past DC of the Ravens before they fired John Harbaugh, ended up going to Seattle in Mike Macdonald. He's got a shot to get to a Super Bowl. This feels like, this is maybe just me taking about it, the Ravens thinking to themselves, we should have just fired John Harbaugh and promoted Mike Macdonald from within. We couldn't do that, so this is the next best choice. He's one of those guys that almost every team seemed to have as one of their finalists for this year. Had the number 1 overall defense in the NFL this year. I don't think the Cardinals were going to be getting him. It seemed like he was in too much demand for other teams, Marcos, to be one of those guys that the Cardinals were going to be able to get.
That McDonald move, by the way, it's crazy that they went ahead and I don't remember. I'm on record saying that I would have loved to have had McDonald instead of having Jonathan Gannon in one of those situations where like we were like kind of a year too late, and I didn't forecast what he was gonna do with the Ravens. But I mean, leaving the Ravens and going over to like Seattle and whatnot, it's just crazy. But as far as Minter's concerned, that seemed like a similar move here. That he's kind of the same type of a coach as Mike Macdonald, bringing up a defense that I mean, they have some pieces over there with the Chargers, so kind of in the same class of coaches that you would see a Mike Macdonald in. Which I mean, if the Cardinals could even sniff getting this guy over to either come in as the head coach, even if it's a CEO situation and whatnot, it would be a big win for him. But, I mean, I think, like you said, I'm not sure if he took the Ravens job already, but he was connected to the Ravens job, right?
That is correct, at least. He is connected to the job, and he did take it as of this afternoon, at least, for that. So
Okay, well,
it definitely is. He's off the board. He's gone. He is going to be the next head coach of the Baltimore Ravens. Another guy who is off the board, the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, is going to be, oh, excuse me, this is the wrong slide over here. Another guy that's off the board is Mike McDaniel. He has not been in, from what we know, for any interviews. He has said that he's going to be the next offensive coordinator for the Los Angeles Chargers, and he's still in contention for a couple of head coaching jobs, though. So he pulled his name out of the Browns head coaching job. He was up there for the Ravens. Seems like he's already kind of got his ducks in a row, that unless he ends up miraculously getting a head coaching job that he would want, that it seems like he's going to be heading there for a year to be the QB guru for Justin Herbert and that spectacular run game. I'm with you, and I think that this was not necessarily the sort of hire that the Cardinals were looking to make. I'd love to have gotten him in for an interview, pick his brain a little bit. We have not heard if that interview has taken place.
That's going to be a crazy offense.
It is indeed.
I would just say that's a guy who I think makes just a lot of sense for him to spend a year again as an OC. Kind of, I hate to say rehab his stock because I liked him, but he's a little quirky, and the way things went down in Miami, it feels like he's a guy who would just benefit from going and letting people remember, oh yeah, this guy's really innovative, right? So I think it makes sense for him to go be the OC. I think with the Chargers, I think it was. Real quick, shout out to Old School Flips. That's my brother in the chat. So
Yeah,
who's a
there
Denver
he is.
Broncos fan. So there's a good reason he mentioned Evero. So
I like a Giro Vero. I was a fan of him, and I was hoping we were gonna pluck him from the Denver Broncos after they fired Vic Fangio, and
That's right.
unfortunately he went over to Carolina, and now he's coaching that defense better than what they're supposed to play. I mean, look at what they did versus the Rams.
Yep. No, I think that's definitely one of those names that has been liked. He, I think, was interesting because he had kind of a Jonathan Gannon-esque defensive collapse in the playoff game against the Rams, where they played a lot of soft coverage once they actually had the lead, and the Rams were able to come back, be able to win that game. It was something that was kind of weird, and people asked him about why he went to the soft coverage, and he explained some of it. He's one of those up-and-coming candidates who has always been around on the interview circuit. I think eventually his time will come for being a head coach. I believe that, unless I'm mistaken, he's in his 45 years old, so he hasn't even hit 50 years old yet. He always can keep thinking that he's in his 30s, but he's been around the league for quite a bit of time.
Hey, they would have won that game, by the way, if it wasn't for Puka Nacua playing as a cornerback.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
game would have been won in that one interception that almost was had.
That's true. Yeah, that would have had that. It was one of the spots where Puka had to come back to the ball and essentially play defense in what was almost a pick by Matthew Stafford. The last of the coaches that are not going to be coming to the Arizona Cardinals is Kevin Stefanski. He's signing with the Atlanta Falcons. They're bringing in a bunch of coaches and coaching staff, and that's part of this hiring process now. The best coaches are up for grabs. The teams that hire quicker and early have more access to bring in some of those coaches, but it's also a relationship business. So how you can put your staff together is super important. But he was a guy that was very close to Jonathan Gannon. I'm excited to see his rushing attack and offense with the Falcons. They've got quarterback questions there just as much as Arizona, but we'll have to see exactly how that plays out.
That's going to be crazy too.
It's going to be interesting for sure. One name that I'm almost ready to rule out, I won't rule it out completely just yet, but this will be kind of the honorable mention rule out, I think, is going to be Clint Kubiak. We talked about the Cardinals brought him in for an interview, and it's just a spot where it feels like he's going to be up there with the Raiders head coaching gig. It just feels like it's one of those places where, like Sean McDermott, he may be too good for the Arizona Cardinals, as it were. If they do move in a Davis Webb direction, that's going to be really interesting to see what will actually open up, because there are still a couple of teams that have head coach openings. And that would include, I believe now, the Buffalo Bills have an opening. I think that he would be an interesting spot for that there. You're also talking about the Steelers are another team that's open. You're looking at a team such as, sorry, I don't know why it's spinning at least as far as for in my head. Cleveland is another spot at least where it seems like he's not going to be taking the Cleveland job. But I'm really curious to be able to see exactly how it goes with the Steelers. Would they really pass on a Clint Kubiak if the Raiders end up picking Davis Webb? I don't think so. And I'm in a spot where I'm ready to rule him out for the Arizona Cardinals. So we've got 3 new candidates that have interviewed that we can finally talk about for now. This, of course, is being recorded on a Thursday. We've got former Cardinals defensive line coach Jeff Burke was interviewed. This is a guy that we did not talk about last time. His name's been out there for a week or so now. They've not brought him back yet for a second interview yet. We've got Arthur Smith has been the guy who has been come in at least for being the NFL former head coach. He was the Titans under Monty. And we've got a interesting case at least.
That picture.
Yeah, I know it's a crazy picture at least, but it's one of those spots where it's like a lot of people said, hey, we want a former head coach who's an offensive guru that has a history of being able to have good-looking offenses in the NFL. And then Arthur Smith's name come up and people go, oh, no, not Arthur Smith. And a lot of that has to do with he's never really had a steady, solid quarterback. His best quarterback in the time that he's been an offensive coordinator was 1 year of Ryan Tannehill and 1 year of Aaron Rodgers at age 41 this past season. which is kind of crazy to think about, but he's someone that a lot of Cardinals fans have not wanted to have as a head coaching candidate.
Yeah, he doesn't move the needle for me.
Same here. I mean, he'd be kind of a high floor guy. He'd raise that basement a little bit and be, a good running game and some stability. But he's not a guy I'm excited about as head coach. Oh, I just want to throw in a name that I have that has not been publicly linked to them, but for the Steelers, a bird kind of suggested that Mike McCarthy might be a guy they're interested in with the Steelers.
Yeah, Mike McCarthy, it sounds like they're interested. Aaron Rodgers even said that he talked about joining wherever Mike McCarthy went. And that's a name that, from what we can tell, at least with the Cardinals, we've heard nothing about him interviewing. We've heard nothing about him being on the radar. Either it would suddenly come out of left field, or my suspicion is that he quietly turned down an opportunity with the Cardinals. Like, that would make the most amount of sense to me, would be that they reached out to Mike McCarthy. Mike McCarthy said no. They just didn't go public with it, because that would make a lot of sense, at least, since it kind of saves a little bit of face, not just for the side of the Cardinals, but also if Mike McCarthy's up for the Steelers gig and then you find out, hey, he didn't get the Steelers gig, but he turned down the Cardinals job and the Cardinals hired somebody else. Yeah. Suddenly Mike McCarthy's got some egg on his face because he turned down a head coaching opportunity and did not get a better one. That would be one of the spots, at least, where I could see that being the case where for the Arizona Cardinals, which leads us, of course, to the final of the three new candidates, which is going to be Anthony. Let me make sure I get the last name pronounced right. Anthony Campanelli. And it looks like it's Campanelli. What do you kind of put it? But it looks like Campanile is what it looks like. He was one that came out of left field because we had not heard that he was in for a first interview. And suddenly we get announced that it's going to be in for a second interview.
Yeah, he's like the wrestler that's coming in during a match and it's like, wait, who is this guy? And then you hear the noise coming in and we're like,
the entrance music
come from? Yeah, the intro music with the running to the ring with the chair about to like wreak some havoc. So, and obviously from what his personality has given in the clip that's going on with the Miami Dolphins, where he's just dropping F-bomb after F-bomb, and what is it? He's getting a lot of comparisons to The Sopranos or something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting, at least, especially because he's Italian, like Italian American, and so when it comes to Italian Americans, like language and being able to be expressive, it's very different from Jonathan Gannon. Whereas Jonathan Gannon was very much like, "Hey, how many of you guys took the bus this morning? You got that fire in your gut?" This is a guy who is going to be bouncing off the walls, doing this, motivating in a different way. There, it's a very different type of coach, at least for the most part. And there's some intrigue because there's a lot of interesting things to like about Campanelli. When his name first came up, it was kind of a, I had never considered that name for the Cardinals. Jaguars fans, what is it like? And Jaguars fans went, don't take him. We love him. Don't take him. And that's a really interesting indication of him as a coach.
And, the fiery persona is what has gotten attention. And that's, and I don't want to undersell that, being charismatic matters. But I'm less moved by that than I am by his resume, because you look at it with Jacksonville, right? He transformed that defense, right? It was I'm looking at 27th ranked scoring defense into the 8th best in the league. And he's the book on him is he's really good in terms of run fits and discipline against the run game, right? And then and kind of some of the Fangio kind of things that he brings, and it's like there are things tangibly to like besides just the viral clips of him, and that's why for me he's now that the names emerge, he's near the top of my list. He's, in terms of the first-time head coaches who are defensive coordinators, he's probably my top name right now in that category of coach. There's some, former offensive coordinators that maybe I like as much or better, but if you're looking for that up-and-coming defensive coordinator to be a head coach, this guy has the performance, the fire, and some interesting things in terms of what he does as a coach schematically.
Right. He had the Jaguars with the number 1 run defense this year, and they went from like 24th up until I think it was 8th overall in defense. He spent a lot of time as a linebackers coach, but he also previously served as a tight ends coach and a wide receivers coach. So he's had experience in both sides of the ball, something that Jonathan Gannon really didn't have. Gannon was a guy who had like a little bit of experience as a scout, and then ended up flipping into kind of just being a quality control and defensive backs coach for the most part. He went and worked with Michigan in 2019 as their linebackers coach, went to the Dolphins in 2020 to 2023, ended up parlaying that into working with the Green Bay Packers last year as their linebackers coach and run game coordinator. He went to the Jacksonville Jaguars from there, and he was pulled along with Liam Cohen. What's interesting is that Jaguars fans actually tested and said he built the defensive staff over there. So he knew the people, he built it up. It wasn't Liam Cohen who recruited guys on the defense. It was Campanelli. And that's something at least where you're saying, can he put together a staff? Part of it, I think, too, is also when you take a look at some of the list of guys who are left, you take a look at all of the list of names, he stands out. And so it's a spot of maybe you can say as the Cardinals, okay, we're not going to get Harbaugh. We're not going to get a Clint Kubiak, the up-and-coming young coordinator. We're probably not going to end up getting Sean McDermott. He's like, it's kind of one of those old adages, which is if you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with. If he's a guy who wants to turn this into a head coaching job with the Arizona Cardinals, gets to that second interview, he might be like one of the best remaining guys that's on the list who will say yes to the gig. I know that may not sound like a ringing endorsement, but you also have to look at if this is not a desired head coaching job and you get a guy who does want to be there, who actually has a track record of turning defenses around. And I think that's something that's also different from Jonathan Gannon, because Jonathan Gannon took over a uber talented Philadelphia Eagles team and coached it to blowing second half leads and a lot of soft coverage, but still was able to make it up with sacks and turnovers. He never was one of the guys who was able to scheme up a solid run defense, whereas this is a guy who's taken a bad run defense and taken a lot of players and is able to scheme up a really great run defense this year. They faced, I believe someone said 11 guys this year on the schedule who were 1,000-yard rushers for the running backs this year. And they did not give up 100 yards. I think it was maybe once on the season they did, but they faced Jonathan Taylor twice. And they did a really good job, at least, of being able to keep him in check. I'm pulling up the stats that he had for the season up against the Jaguars. And it was the first game he had 21 carries for 74 yards. Second game against the Jaguars, 21 carries for 70 yards. You're talking about 3.3 yards per carries to the NFL's rushing champ in Jonathan Taylor. They kept him under 100 yards. That defense did a great job overall. And it's something where, like, if you're talking about moving on and finding the opposite of what you previously had in a head coach, instead of going from the guy who's going to be kind of calm, cool, and collected, we've had two of those coaches in a row. Going back to someone who's maybe a little closer to a Bruce Arians who gets emotional on the sideline, I don't know if that just is going to be something that is going to be better, but I can tell you for a lot of Cardinals fans, there's going to be quite a bit of relief just to see someone who's got that energy and that passion on the sideline in a way that we really haven't seen since BA. That would be something that I think a lot of Cardinals fans would look forward to versus a much more stoic, kind of calm, cool, collected at all times Jonathan Gannon.
Yeah, I didn't like how there were certain penalties that he just refused to like do anything about. I wanted a coach to be on the sideline either yelling, like either at the ref or like not so much to like put us in a bad bind situation, but to at least show that he cares. Or like, for instance, the one that sticks out to me is that face mask that wasn't called on Michael Carter, and Jonathan Gann is nowhere to be able to like complain or pull over the ref and say
Right.
like he pulled his face mask. Like maybe he doesn't get the flag, but at least they pay attention to it. He's just like whatever about it.
Yeah, I think you've raised an interesting kind of question about personality and temperament. A lot of the guys that we're looking at who are kind of the more established, the Vance Josephs, Raheem Morris, the Matt Nagy's, although he was just loosely connected to us. Those guys remind me a little more of like a Todd Bowles kind of. They're the calm. They're going to raise the floor. but I have a hard time seeing this team competing in this division anytime soon with that kind of coach. Like Todd Bowles is a good coach in a bad division who can win that division, but would not, as much as I respect him, would not be able to take this Cardinals team. And that's how I worry about one of the retreads, the Vance Josephs, that those guys are just good at. So I think there, but like you can take that route and build a good program and build kind of build up the floor, and then maybe we have to, the next coaches who takes us to the promised land, or when the division landscape shifts and we get a better quarterback and the other teams are in the decline, that coach can win.
Yeah.
But if you want to have a chance to win soon, you need to catch lightning in a bottle with a coach. It's a lottery ticket with an up and coming coordinator, Campanelli, right? Someone like LaFleur, like Kubiak, one of those guys that might be that voodoo kid, right?
Right, like what Sean McVay was, or what Sean McDermott was. Sean McDermott was a defensive guy, and he took on a pretty much what was a rebuild in Buffalo. You caught, like you said, caught lightning in a bottle, and were able to take off. It's one of the reasons why I think I was talking at least with someone, at least in the Twitter DMs, who's a large content creator, and he was like, there's a chance the Cardinals could, quote unquote, fall ass backwards into a good hire if this is the guy, because other guys have told them no. And because when it comes down to one of the other coaches, at least that we'll talk about here in a second, I think that it is not the next guy, at least up, who's in there, but it's one of the guys who's right afterwards, at least for that, in Vance Joseph. A lot of Cardinals fans have objected to Vance Joseph being the guy. There's been an entire article about Cardinals fans complaining about if that was their best option. I know Benjamin Albright has said that the Cardinals are waiting on Vance Joseph. When asked about the Rams coordinators, he's like, yeah, you'd love to have the Rams coordinators. They're not coming there. That would make something where if you know that it's going to be a negative reaction to Vance Joseph, you want to have to pivot, hire another defensive guy because offensive guys aren't wanting to come here. Being able to get a guy who at least has spent time with Liam Cohen, has spent time with Matt LaFleur on some of those offensive staffs, being able to pull some of those coaches. One of the interesting questions to me is, could you pull a Grant Udinski, one of the guys who's up for the Cleveland Browns job, going up along with the Rams coordinator Shieldhouse? Could you pull Grant Udinski to say, hey, guess what? You can't call plays in Jacksonville because that's what Liam Cohen's job is. You're an uber talented guy. Come on in here. We'll keep you for a year just to be able to keep you at least for the most. Maybe it'd be 2 years depending on how the quarterback situation plays out. Can you catch that lightning in a bottle? And I think it's better, like you said, to try to catch that lightning in a bottle with a coach who has not done it before but could do it versus a Vance Joseph who we saw what he could do. We saw questionable game management issues. He didn't have a quarterback last time either in Denver. There's a lot of things he could bring to the defense that are good, but could you get the same level of quality on the defense and maybe get one of those guys who could give you a boost on both sides of the ball? That's part of why I think for me, as far as realistic, he's vaulted up my list recently. I know some people have even questioned, is this a guy that you're going to take a look at with, well, maybe the rushing defense was good because his pass defense wasn't. So let's take a look at that, because I think that is a really good question. So last year, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I'll see if I can zoom in for those of you who are watching on screen, they finished in first in the NFL in terms of rushing yards per game prevented. So that's always, it's not most rushing yards given up, most rushing yards prevented. Jacksonville Jaguars finished first. How did they do in terms, though, of passing yardage? And the answer is they were not the top as far as passing yardage, but they were not near the bottom at all. The worst passing attacks were against the Dallas Cowboys, the Baltimore Ravens, part of what led to the firing of John Harbaugh. Even a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers had that balance of being good against, I think it was ref shod against both edges, which is part of what led to Mike Tomlin stepping down. Jacksonville Jaguars were not one of those teams that went up there. They gave up 218 passing yards per game, a little bit less than the Arizona Cardinals gave up. Cardinals, meanwhile, gave up 126 rushing yards per game. That ended up being one of the worst in terms of the bottom 10 of the NFL for rushing yards per game given up. So I think, honestly, a lot of it comes down to questions about the personnel. They made some trades in the middle of their season when it comes to the Jaguars. They had a couple of younger guys who had to really kind of step up to be able to take over in the secondary. I think coming into a secondary that has Will Johnson in it, a bunch of second round corners, you're probably going to have to sign another veteran corner just to be able to get through it. But Jacksonville did not have a very good depth chart when it came to their cornerback. So they traded away Tyson Campbell, got back Greg Newsome, who was able to step up. But I'm going to name a couple of guys in there. Have you guys ever heard of Jerrion Jones or Eric Murray? How about Montarik Brown? Maybe a Christian Braswell, a Keith Taylor. They had Travis Hunter, and Travis Hunter ended up on the season on IR. That was the guy that really they were depending on a lot. He ended up playing a lot more on receiver because they had an injury to Brian Thomas, at least, for most of the season. The other receivers really struggled. Up until they were able to bring in Jacoby Myers, it really was a struggle for Jacksonville. They were winning games with defense. They were running the ball all right, but they were just barely trying to get by. And then the offense started to flourish when they added Jacoby Myers and Parker Washington took on a bigger role later in the season. I think that it's more of a coach that you're talking about when that identity was winning games with defense. That's one thing that Jonathan Gannon, we wanted for him, but we never actually saw him be able to accomplish. We saw, unfortunately, that they were not able to win games with defense, nor were they able to really win games with offense in 2022.
Yeah, that's fair to say that, the list of cornerbacks that you just mentioned and whatnot, and also trading away some corners. Greg Newsome didn't play a really big role with them from what I understood and whatnot. So getting those type of players and not being worse than the Cardinals are, but being the best run defense, I'm sold with that.
Let me add to that, because this is a good team, right? That he's coming. They're 13-4. They were ahead in a lot of games, so like teams are trying to pass to play catch up on them, and they won some games convincingly. So as much as people are talking about their pass defense being down, yeah, no kidding, because teams are trying to play catch up. But here's what I find interesting. Look at where they were in points a game, right? With teams trying to play catch up with them. With teams trying to get into the boat race with them, they were still like top 10, I think, in points per game, like 8th, I think. So teams are trying to, they're taking a lead. They've got big leads in some of those games. Teams are trying their damnedest to pass the ball on them to get caught up. Yes, their passing defense is still better than the Cardinals, right? With teams trying to play catch up, and they kept their scoring defense. So like, I'm not gonna worry too much about that passing defense when you consider the game situation and the fact that they still were in the top 10 in points with teams trying to throw everything at catching up with them.
Yeah, they gave up about 19.8 points per game. You compare that to the Arizona Cardinals at the bottom of the list at 28 points per game. You're able to win games if you can hold teams to under 20 points a game. You can win a lot of games in the NFL. You want to take a look at something really interesting. Take a look at from everyone from the Cleveland Browns and that beautiful defense. Look all the way up from the Cleveland Browns, and you'll see nothing but playoff teams and one Kansas City Chiefs team. But every other team that held teams to under 20 points a game was a playoff team this year. I take that back. 2 teams. The Minnesota Vikings were the other one. Chiefs and Vikings both had major offensive struggles this year. They were missing their quarterback for most of the year in Minnesota, and they lost their quarterback for who knows how long with the Kansas City Chiefs. But we saw the Vikings in the playoffs last year. We saw the Chiefs in the playoffs for the last decade, it feels like. It's something where, honestly, if you can hold teams under 20 points per game, it's a way and a recipe for winning NFL. And I don't think it's like that we want to talk ourselves into this coach. It's a spot where it could turn out to be terrible. It could just be where we get 3 years from now with Campanelli and he gets fired just like a Jonathan Gannon does, where the team isn't able to turn it around and they continue to have quarterback problems. I think it most part is you can never really just say, here's the what ifs or here's how this will be. You just have to look at what is the here and now. And the here and now is you got a guy who's come in for a second interview. We'll see if he's interested in coming back for anything more, because it seems like the Arizona Cardinals, we can transition now, are still waiting on a couple of coaches. They could hire this guy immediately, so the fact that they haven't makes me think they're waiting on another coach or two to see how things go with the playoff games this weekend. So we've talked a little bit last time about other guys such as Chris Shula, the defensive coordinator for the Rams, who the Cardinals had an interview, as well as Mike LaFleur, the former Jets offensive coordinator and the current Rams and former, I guess, as well, Rams offensive coordinator. That's probably the sexiest name that's still out there, would be Mike LaFleur. You bring him in, you get a LaFleur, someone who's part of that tree, someone who's within the division. That's probably the top name that would be remaining on the list if you're an Arizona Cardinals fan and you're looking for an offensive hire. One that's popped up that's been really interesting, that's kind of an honorable mention because he hasn't been in that we know of. Like Campanelli was apparently in for an interview. We didn't know anything about it, so you don't know. But Davis Webb is a guy that is really interesting because he's been in there when it comes to interviews with being linked to Vance Joseph, this guy right here. But he's being talked about as a candidate in his own right for the Las Vegas Raiders job, and he's got a familiar name that he's bringing along with him potentially as his offensive coordinator. It's been rumored that Cliff Kingsbury would be coming along with him as his OC should he get hired. Whew, that would be one of those moves where I probably am looking at saying, hey, could Davis Webb come to Arizona? Yeah, he could. Probably not as the head coach, though, if that's going to be his offensive coordinator. Maybe more likely that Vance Joseph ends up being the guy who goes with him. I got to say this, guys. I would be okay with the Davis Webb hire. He's an up-and-coming coach on the rise. I don't think anyone expects Cliff Kingsbury to follow him here, though. That means we get a little bit of time now to talk about Vance Joseph here before we wrap up our show talking about the Cardinals and the number 3 overall pick. Is there anything more to be said that hasn't been said already about Vance Joseph? We haven't talked about it, I think, as much with you, Joe, so I'm curious to some of your thoughts, at least, about what a Vance Joseph reunion would look like for Arizona, as he still seems to be, at least odds-wise with betting online, he is the odds-on favorite still for the Arizona head coach job.
Well, let me start by saying what a marvelous job of photoshopping that you did, Blake. I just think
it took me a long time. I asked AI to be able to picture what Vance Joseph would look like in an Arizona Cardinals outfit as a coach for the Cardinals, and let me tell you, AI delivered.
It sure did. Well, listen, my brother, who's a lifelong Broncos fan, is saying he should stay in Denver. And they want him, or at least he wants him there. I don't hate Vance Joseph as an option as much as most Cardinals fans seem to. I'm not in love with the option. To me, again, it just feels again like a Todd Bowles kind of, he'll bring a good culture. He'll bring a good defense, build a good defense. I have a hard time seeing him win in this division until the landscape changes or the quarterback changes, situation. But if we can't get an exciting, kind of lightning in the bottle lottery ticket coordinator, we could do worse than bringing in a guy who knows the organization, has some success building a good defense, and I do believe would get the defense humming, right? If you can build a good defense and develop that defense, get enough offense to do something, you can be competitive. So I would not be excited about the hire. I would understand why people, because of the remembering what it was like with Cliff Kingsbury, would not like that. But I think he would bring some stability and build a good defense. I'm just not confident we'd be, competing this division until the landscape changes.
Yeah, you guys already know how I feel about this one. My issue is always going to remain some of the situational play calling that he had here. I had an issue with when we had to get one of those stops and we didn't get a stop. And
called press man cover 0, easy blitz to beat over the middle. I remember that Andy Dalton Bengals game where it just felt like that. The Cardinals won that on a Kyler Murray run, but there was too many times that veteran quarterbacks did well. Now, some good stuff. He did hold in his last, I think it was 4 of his last 6 games. He held the Shanahan tree to under 20 points. But you also look at the talent that they had back then. They spent tons and tons of money getting J.J. Watt. You saw Byron Murphy and Zach Allen had been draft picks that finally panned out in year 3. It really took a long time for that defense to work. Similar to Denver, it took a couple of years, but that defense now is the number 1, I believe, pass. I don't know if it was pass defense this year. I'll have to double check at least. But number 1 in quite a few metrics this year. It just took a period of time to be able to get there, and he didn't do a great job of developing the young guys who were there. And that was one of the things I think that you had a hard time with as well, Marcos.
The development was really my issue, is because he's getting a defense that he's going to build up here, and he's going to have to go through the draft to be able to develop. And the issue was obviously when we would draft picks, it wouldn't matter if they were like first round, second or third round. The development was the issue. So when he goes over to Denver, what I like about him is that Denver really like has his. So Brett Coleman had mentioned this before, so I'm going to go ahead and piggyback off of this. He's always talked about he wants his guys, and when he goes over to Denver, those guys make his system flourish because they're specialized in that role. And Zach Allen, who will tell you like the best out of Vance Joseph, and probably does not want to lose Vance Joseph, even though it took a little bit to develop. But that guy has really been the anchor for him being able to process that type of a defense. And we all know like it's a very like mix between like a Wade Phillips scheme and a Zimmerman scheme, double mugs look, having the cornerback who's a stud in PS2, and also Jaquan. I'll give him credit for Jaquan McMillan finding that guy, and they put all those pieces together. Riley, I forget what his name is. Riley, uh, I forget what his name, but the cornerback opposite side.
Oh,
So
yeah, Riley Moss, I believe, is
Riley
the one you're
Moss.
talking about.
There
Yeah.
you go. So that'll give him credit for developing Riley Moss and finding Jaquan McMillan. But a lot of those pieces fit that type of defense that he wants to run over with Denver. Super aggressive, sending Riley Moss. I read it on your brother put that on there in the chat. Putting those guys in a position where that's their specialty. Singleton is the perfect linebacker for him, and the two edge defenders, Nick Manito being the stud that ended up now flourishing, and of course Jonathan Cooper. So those guys are staples for what he wants to run on defense, and they really raise him up when it comes to his defense being such a like a one that turns the ball over quite a bit, as we saw versus the Bills, of course.
Yep. No, I think it'll be really interesting to be able to see how, if this thing came back, a lot of Cardinals fans would reject it. I think that's part of the reason why they reached out to Campanelli for a second interview. So, really, it's going to be interesting to see if he can bring along a Davis Webb for a year or two. You don't usually see coordinators leave from an offensive coordinator position unless they're winning games. Like we all talked about how Nick Rallis was a hot candidate. He was going to get head coaching interviews. Drew Petzing got a head coaching interview. He didn't end up leaving. And a lot of times it just shows you need to win games, make the playoffs, get playoff wins. Those are the ones that get rewarded. So if Vance Joseph does bring a Davis Webb in and Webb ends up going, it would mean that the Cardinals would be winning games. So that's where I would be in favor, at least, of having a coach who's good enough that you can see him go off and get promoted elsewhere. We haven't really seen that since Bruce Arians and Todd Bowles either. That's something I think the Cardinals are looking for. So let's go over some final thoughts, at least here, before we talk just a smidge about the Cardinals' number 3 overall draft pick. Here's kind of the 3 names that seem to stand out the most, which is going to be, at least for mine, this is Campanile, Vance Joseph, for just, you have to put him in there, and then Mike LaFleur. Honorable mention is, just in case it happens, Arthur Smith. These, I think, are the 3 most likely candidates for the next Cardinals head coach. I think Sean McDermott is going to be taking a year off of coaching, would not be there. The Cardinals, from what we know, have not necessarily reached out to him, or at least if they have, we haven't heard that they reached out from him. I think from what we can say, though, is this is a smaller list. Now, Joe, you've got a list of 5 guys you said that you would be more than content with as the next Cardinals head coach.
Yeah, and I would agree. I will say I agree with you that these 3 are the most likely, right? If we're talking about most probable. Guys like I would be happy with or really interested. Obviously McDermott, though we don't think he's coming here. But let me add a few names that some that we've talked about before, some we haven't. Thomas Brown, I would be happy with. We talked about him last time, was on what I like about what he does holistically, build, his work with running backs and everything. So that's another guy I would be pretty happy about if we brought him in. Kubiak, that offensive mind, I could be happy with that. Joe Brady, another offensive coordinator. I would. Oh yeah,
didn't even have Joe Brady that was over in that list. That was the one name that I forgot.
Yeah, so those are. So when I think I'd be happy with Campanelli, LaFleur, Kubiak, Brady, obviously McDermott, Thomas Brown, right? I'd be happy with any of those guys. Not, would not be excited about Vance Joseph, but we talked about that. So those are some of the names that I would be happy with.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's talk about Joe Brady here real quick, at least, because I think that's something that, and I've got a very small picture of him, at least for the most part. There's probably better quality pictures that you can find. Let's talk about Joe Brady here for a second. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that I can get that picture pulled up over in here. But yeah, let's go and manage to talk, because he's kind of a guy who's not necessarily been on the upswing for a lot of people. A lot of people are negative about him. They've looked at him as being a coaching option that is kind of on the downswing, because they've run a lot of mesh this year with Josh Allen. I think the lack of receiving talent is a big part of that. He's a guy who coached the LSU offense when they won the national title, went to the Carolina Panthers. I think was a little bit scapegoated when it came to their offense, because I remember they had Teddy Bridgewater and Mike Davis. And what they did was they just dissected that Cardinals defense way back in, I think it was 2019, where we were, maybe it was 2020 was where it was. It was the COVID year, because I remember we wanted Isaiah Simmons to play at safety versus linebacker, and they put another safety who they promptly cut from the Cardinals after that game because they kept attacking and going at him. I've seen a lot of a flexible nature to him, where he's able to at least adapt and be able to upgrade. Maybe the mesh concept that he ran wasn't adapting as much and it got a little bit stale, but he's up for the head coaching gig there. He's up for the head coaching gig at other places. He's one of those guys who would be able to, I think, bring and fetch a veteran defensive coordinator, and he's a guy that I think will be a little picky about his jobs. He's been fired from the Panthers before, but here's what I keep saying. He still is awaiting his first head coach opportunity. If you can be that team that offers that to him and nobody else is actually offering that to him, you could get a guy who's been kind of a rising star or a consistent star, comes out of the Sean Payton tree, to be your head coach. That could be something that could help compete with these other offensive gurus in the NFC West by bringing one in of your own.
Just when I think about him, I feel like it just seems like, think about the quarterback in college who decides to go back for another year to improve his draft stock. Maybe he's a late first round pick, but he wants to be the first overall pick. And then he just has it just goes sideways, right? And it ends up being a mistake. It feels like there was a time where he was a hot name, and he, for whatever reason, didn't get a job, didn't capitalize it. And then, as you talked about, on the downswing, but when Josh Allen emerged, right, he was a hot, his name was kind of hot after that, in terms of working with him. But so there's risk with him. The question is how much of that is Josh Allen versus him, and how much does he get credit
and
for
how
that?
much of it was Joe Burrow versus him.
Right.
And it's like, and I think some of it is that's part of why I've harped on getting a quarterback is in the next couple of years is going to be something important, because that's every offensive coordinator. You see guys who succeed with having tough offenses, which he did succeed some with the Panthers and Matt Rule, but you also can say, hey, this is a guy who took over. What I will say this year is he led the Bills rushing attack, and the Bills were the top rushing team this year. James Cook had over 1,000 yards, was a tough rusher. Only reason why he wasn't the rushing champion, I think he actually may have been the rushing champion this year, was just the year that Jonathan Taylor had with all the chaos that was going on in Indianapolis is more impressive. But he went and took the Bills, who had been a pass-heavy team after Brian Daboll left, and they took on, I think it was one of those, it was an angry coach who had taken over for a season or so. He took over after that. And they just consistently were able to run the ball down your throat, make the playoffs, had good passing game concepts. Like the play that they made, at least, to be able to win the game or get to overtime against the Broncos, he called up the perfect read on a hook and ladder, where it was just exactly what they had to have it on fourth down. One of those plays where I'm like, this is great. I just watched Drew Petzing run the ball on 3rd and 8 against the Titans and in a game-winning play. And this guy has the confidence to bust out a hook and ladder play when they need it on 4th down. I felt like there's a lot of confidence in there that could be able to say that the Bills are very clutch when it came to it. I think some of that's Josh Allen, but I think you also have to credit the play caller in addition to some of that, because that wasn't a Josh Allen thing. That was a discipline, execution. We got to run this play and being able to execute in the run game. I've seen enough in the run and pass game that I think there can be some questions overall. But if you say this is a guy we can grab for his first head coach opportunity, I would have no issues bringing in Joe Brady.
Yeah, and just real quick to wrap up what I was saying, and to your point, like he's on the downswing, but there's some things to like about him. But like we are not in a position where we get to be as picky as we'd like to.
Correct.
So if this is like the best offensive coordinator out there we can hire, if LaFleur says no thanks, if Kubiak's not interested, right? If the other offensive minds aren't, the up and coming offensive coordinators aren't interested, then maybe we take a chance on a guy who's maybe his stock's down a little bit, but there's still potential.
Totally agree. Marcos, any other last thoughts about Brady?
Yeah, it's funny is because I'm actually doing a little bit of a study session on Brady. I wanted to see how, like, Vance Joseph's defense, how they were trying to defend the run versus them. And I've seen a lot of like wide zone, this same similar type of stuff that you're seeing with a lot of what's going on with offensive coordinators, and they're switching to like more under center. So he's obviously going to bring over that perspective of having that type of a mindset of pounding the ball, running more wide zone, having running backs read from the outside to in and whatnot. And I agree with you. The passing attack, it looks a lot better, but it also has Josh Allen throwing the ball. So, I mean, that's a little bit of what goes on. But I'm seeing a lot of these concepts where he's also generating some easy looks to be able to get guys in wide open space, kind of like what Cliff Kingsbury was doing his first couple of years, where he was just trying to generate like easy looks and attacking grass and whatnot. So he has both an air raid type of concept from his college days and under center pro style offense as well. So I think he's a pretty good, like he runs a pretty good scheme.
I think it's worth also noting, like, he hasn't had elite receivers to work with either.
Right. They did have Stephon Diggs, and when they had Stephon Diggs, they had a lot of times that Diggs got frustrated saying, throw me the ball more. They switched to a run-heavy attack that Diggs got frustrated with, but the offense got better, and then Diggs still got his targets. So it's something that I think is really interesting to look at. As far as, for me, I think he's one of those coaches that normally I'd think he'd be too good for the Cardinals. But in this scenario, it's a spot where you're beginning him on the downswing. Yeah, it's on the rebound. Exactly.
Exactly.
All right, let's get to some of our comments here with overtime before we end up getting any further, at least for the most part. So we've got Old School Flips Your Brothers saying the Cardinals need more than a nice coordinator. They need a culture changer, have to get that part of the hiring process right. You've got Sean Scott likes Campanile a lot, doesn't know if the Cards should go offensive mind or defensive mind head coach. Got Mizaki Felix is not a fan of him. He says Coach Camp has a style that wears thin quickly. I like the term Ant Camp for Anthony Campanile, but Coach Camp, maybe that becomes like how JG with the stoicness, maybe it becomes too campy for some of the vibe. He says that he had a great rush defense, but his pass defense was suspect. Dana disagrees. He said when you look at the Jaguars' defensive backs, interceptions, and opposing passer rating and its yards given up, it ended up working out pretty well. Dana also goes on to say, all I want for the announced coach is to not be able to say should have kept Coach Gannon. I think we can all agree with that. That's something that's really interesting, at least from Dana, to think about too, because I think that's what every Cardinals fan wants to do, is to be happy with this hire. So those are kind of what we've had for our final thoughts. Now, what I do want to at least talk about now to finish up is a tweet that I sent out that got a little bit of discussion going. I had sent out saying a trade idea, talking about Arizona. We've said the Jets seem like a perfect place for Kyler Murray. No number 2 quarterback to be taken this year. They need to get a veteran to potentially save the jobs of Aaron Glenn that's over there. They've got a plethora of draft picks, multiple first, 2 second rounders, no third rounder this year, but have a 4th rounder. So I said, all right, I got an idea for you. Jets pick number 2, Cardinals pick number 3. Instead of, say, the Jets being able to give up one of their second-round picks for straight up for Kyler Murray, what about a trade swap idea? Cardinals send Kyler Murray and a 4th-round pick to the New York Jets, and they then swap to move up to the number 2 overall pick. Would the Jets say yes, or would the Jets say no? And I got a lot of feedback on this. I had a lot of Cardinals fans who said, nope, I'm not taking anything less than a second for Kyler. A lot saying, no, why would I swap up to the number 2 overall pick? I've got 3 great pass rushers that are there. And that is a good point. There are some good pass rushers that are present within the status, at least. I've got the slideshow ready to go right here. Let me pull this over. You've got 3 guys this year. You've got Ruben Bain, the shorter armed. He's going to have less than 31-inch arms, pass rusher out of Miami. You've got the Texas Tech guy who made a ton of plays against Oregon in David Bailey. And then, of course, Monty being Monty, you can never rule out Arvell Reese, the linebacker, who played a lot of inside linebacker. Maybe he's more of the inside rusher, kind of maybe like a Hassan Reddick type in Arvell Reese. A lot of people have said when you got those 3 pass rushers on the board, plus Francis Mauga, the offensive tackle at Miami, why in the world would you give up draft capital to move up? And my point was, well, let's say you've got a higher grade on Ruben Bain than the other 2, and the Jets are going to take him at number 2. Could you pull off a deal to be able to move up and take your pass rusher of choice? And the answer to that was very mixed. Some fans were in agreement, said, yeah, you know what, go up and get your guy. Others went, I'm preferring to stay put and not give up draft capital, keep a high 4th. Marcos, let's go with what you have first, and then we'll wrap up with Joe for tonight on some of, is Blake just being crazy again with some of these trade ideas?
Well, the reason why this is well, first of all, if you're going to move off of Kyler Murray and being able to move up a position, especially since like there's no second quarterback in this draft. Obviously, when you have your pick of who you want to get, you want to make sure you do get that absolute stud, because we've seen that there's a drop off between the number 1 outside linebacker or defensive end and to the second one, a la the situation that happened with Will Anderson. The drop off from Will Anderson to the very next guy was so severe that the guy essentially has become a bust. I forgot what his name was. He was the Texas Tech guy that came out, and it was a competition to see which one of the 2 did you want as defensive end. You are certifiably going to get a stud if like everything pans out to what the scouting reports are, to what any pro day or any type of things that may come out, because we all know that these all this stuff gets jumbled up until it's like draft day to see who's number 1 and number 2. But if you have that opportunity, you don't want to just settle for number 2 when you can get a game record at your number 1 on your board and stuff.
Yeah, I think so as well, Joe. I think Francis Mauga is probably the safest prospect in the draft compared to these edge rushers, because there's flaws with each of these different guys. Like as Jake is saying, you've got a hothead with Bailey, you've got a T-Rex at least. I at least have an interesting comparison, which I'll get to, that I talked about in some of the group texts that I'm in with some of our other podcast hosts, Jess Root, Seth Cox, and then of course the PHNX. We've got there's like a group text of some of the people that'll go on. The comparison that I had for Ruben Bain was James Harrison, a guy who's not going to be quite as measurables, but he's going to be one of those just ferocious on tape, looks really dominant. You got a raw prospect, at least, in Arvell Reese. And, of course, you got someone in David Bailey who's super talented, but like you said, there's going to be questions, at least ultimately, about him. How much of that's going to be character? How much of that's going to be just the fact that these are 3 guys who all do love and are good at football in their own ways. It's a spot where a lot of people have also questioned, said the Cardinals should be trading back from that number 3 pick, because you could probably get someone who wants to jump up for their favorite guy of choice. Joe, do you think it's a worthwhile conversation? I think some people have also wondered, hey, like, would Murray even go to New York? I think that he probably would not have a choice. If he's going to say he'd sooner retire, okay, go ahead, walk away from the millions of dollars that's left on your deal, because any player who does retire is going to forfeit a lot of those, because if he's on the roster at the certain year of the salary cap, that's where he's going to have to play. If he's going to retire and miss out on another $40 million because he doesn't want to go to New York, cool, go ahead. That clears your problem off of your books. He does not have a no trade clause. He may not have a choice to where he's going to go. I think he'll have a little bit of say, like he'd prefer Atlanta or Minnesota, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, if Atlanta and Minnesota go elsewhere, he may have to make it work, at least with the Jets team that I think would definitely want him. And he does not get the same amount of say, I think, because of the lack of a no trade clause. Deshaun Watson had a no trade clause in his extension. That was part of ultimately why he's still with the Cleveland Browns. He had all sorts of levels of control, and that's something why it's super important. All the quarterbacks did. Kyler's agent did not get that for him. I think it's something at least that is worth talking about, and maybe I'm wrong in the factor, and the Cardinals should just stay put at 3. They get their favorite guy who is on the board, maybe just happens to fall to them there, and may not even be one of these pass rushers.
Yeah, I think he's going to go. I think he's just going to, in the end, be glad to go somewhere where he can start potentially. So I don't think he has anything to say. And in terms of the question, is it worthwhile question? Certainly, it got conversation, so it's a worthwhile question. It's not out of the realm of possibility. in terms of the what you talked about trading up and including Kyle in that. For me, I am not doing that. I am not trading up unless I'm going for my quarterback. And even if it's an elite player, another position I like, that early, the only position I'm really trading up for is quarterback. If I don't like the guys at my pick, I'm trying to trade back. And I'd add another kind of wrinkle to this. Looking at the quarterback situation, right? And Michael Bidwell, he's saying what he's saying, but he wants this team to be competitive sooner rather than later. Now, maybe, is that going to happen? I'm not overly optimistic about that. But I actually think the Cardinals, I would look for them to be doing some sort of trade to get next year draft capital, right? Even listen, are they going to be able to get a pick that's going to be a top 5 pick in a trade next year? Probably not. But what they might be able to do is do some sort of either trade Kyler for a future, like a second round pick next year, trade back from 3 to move back for next year draft capital to give themselves ammunition to move up next year if they need to. So I think Monty is, if I had to speculate, that Monty's going to be looking to do some kind of trade back that involves a pick on day 1 or 2 next year that they can use as part of a package to move up if they when they're going for the quarterback next year, when they have a better idea of what that landscape is going to be. So if you're trading Kyler, to me, you're not trading him to move up this year. You're trading him to get an extra pick that you can use as ammunition. Now, maybe you get a pick this year, but then you do another trade back for next year. But whatever you're doing, I think you're not trying to lose picks. You're trying to gain picks to prepare for next year going after your quarterback.
And that's kind of an interesting case, because I think if you're going to say you're going to trade those picks for a quarterback, that does bring up, of course, the Will Anderson trade. So if we take a look at the Will Anderson trade revisited, Cardinals ended up trading that pick away. They ended up basically getting Kalen Bullock, who was one of the top safeties this year, along with Will Anderson. They were also able to take their quarterback, C.J. Stroud, who was probably seen better days, unfortunately, after the last game that he played. Who did the Cardinals get? Paris Johnson. Ooh. B.J. Ojulari. Ooh. Not good. Garrett Williams, you'd say probably it's going to be a good grade, but he's torn his Achilles, it looks like, and so he's going to be on his way back. Will he get it to a second deal? You have Darius Robinson and Elijah Jones was the other pick that it went worthwhile. The Cardinals did trade back again from one of their second-round picks to get a third-round pick that turned into, I believe it was a combination of Trey Benson with one of those thirds, and then the other third was spent on Tip Ryman. They had a bunch of third-round picks, but none of those guys turned into Will Anderson Jr., and their 4th-round pick they traded for Kalen Bullock, which turned out to be great draft picks overall. You kind of have Paris Johnson, you got Garrett Williams, which we'll have to wait and see on him, and then a bunch of guys. So the question, of course, then is the counterpoint is, do you just want to stay put maybe and take the top guy who's there on your board this time instead of trading back? I kind of lean with you of this is the best opportunity if you have to trade up for a quarterback. You also wonder, will the Cardinals be good enough that you'll need to trade up for a quarterback, because they may be a pretty bad team? That's something that's going to be really tough to be able to know, but I kind of am in agreement of, I could probably say I may just say, hey, I'll go ahead, go up and get my guy. It only cost me a 4th. I'll probably take that side. But I can agree with you. If you're going to be doing any sort of a move and trying to be able to move back, or being able just to take a guy who's going to be there, you want to make sure that you're getting the quarterback situation figured out, because if you've got, I think as someone said, if you've got 2 quarterbacks or you got 0 quarterbacks, you've got 0 quarterbacks.
Yeah, right.
0 plus 2 equals 0 when it comes to the NFL. You got to have 1 quarterback, and the Cardinals are likely trading theirs away this year. We'll be back to talk a little bit more about some of that in the future, but I know we're right here a little bit over time. Thank you guys again for tuning in to be able to be here with us. Let's go ahead and we can have our Fearless podcast leader, Joe, if you want to kind of sign us out today, at least with where your content is, or we can follow, and then some of your show schedule for the off season.
Yeah, well, you can find me here on the Cardinal Rule when I'm popping on with folks here. You can find me on Twitter at JOKOMO13, JOKOMO13. And maybe still kind of figuring out what we're doing for mock draft Mondays. That may be coming down the pipeline. It's just some things in works with that. But you obviously stay tuned for the great family of TCR podcasts here on this channel, like Redbird Reboot and the Bird and Gold podcast and other things that may be coming down the pipeline.
Absolutely. Marcos, you want to shout out where we can find your content there?
All right, you can find me at Pancake Soul, and of course, I did one of my first solo streams. So look forward to more of those. It's going to be under this TCR umbrella that obviously Joe Comeau had called out the host and stuff. And look forward to Mock Draft Monday because that's the yearly content that I love from Joe Comeau.
Yep, and then you can find me at Blake Murphy 7 at least on the x.com/Twitter. We'll be back at least with you guys for our weekly show at least next week. Thank you guys again for tuning in. This has been the Redbird Reboot. Cardinals are rebooting. That head coach in process is rebooting. Until next time, guys, it's time for us to log off. See you guys and go Cardinals.